Let me give you a take on Ohio State and Georgia. They are the two best teams in the country, it appears.
Yeah.
A lot of people are throwing Oregon into the mix, maybe Texas.
Yeah.
So here's my take. Best roster 1 through 85, 105, however far you want to go, Georgia. But I don't know that it necessarily matters that you've got your 50th best player on your roster is the best
Yeah.
50th best player on anybody else's roster.
Right.
Top 20 players looking at any roster, I think, is Ohio State. So if they're like that, Georgia, Ohio State, Will Howard if he's truly the 20th best quarterback in the country, because that's typically where he's ranked, is he going to weight down Ohio State and make it difficult for them to run through the tournament at the end of the year? Because I think the 20th best quarterback with this team can win a Big Ten championship or get the second place seed out of the Big Ten and set themselves up as a 5 seed or whatever. But winning those last couple games at the end might be tough.
Yeah, it might be really tough. I think that's the one thing that I push back, and you know as well as anyone that our show's fan base has a bunch of Buckeyes, right? And I've pushed back a ton when people talk about we're the best team in the country. Like, look at our roster. It's like, okay, who are we comparing them to? You said Georgia, Texas, Oregon. Those are 3 proven quarterbacks, like really good quarterbacks. And you can even throw, a couple other teams in the mix, and you're like, I'm not saying Ohio State is not the best team in the country. I'm not saying they're not going to be. But I got to see a lot of growth from Will Howard based on the Kansas State film that I broke down. And we did a deep dive study into the transfer portal class back when, this was a thing. Cam Ward might come to Ohio State and all these other conversations. And he's towards the bottom of the major transfer prospects in a lot of things based on last year. It's not to discredit that he can get better. Ryan Day can develop him. He's going to have better weapons. Like, all of that is true, but he's still not the sure thing, like elite quarterback. We got to see that. We got to see if that's even real.
And when I saw Will Howard 2.5 years ago step in for, I think it was Skylar Thompson, and then the next year it was Adrian Martinez when they tried to hand him the keys, I was like, this guy's a really good quarterback. He led him down the field, made plays with his legs, threw it on time, threw it in the right places, and good quarterback. All positives about Will Howard coming from me as the Kansas State quarterback. But it's funny, there was a switch when I was asked, okay, he's now the Ohio State quarterback. Oh, my evaluation of Will Howard suddenly changed because the expectations changed.
Yeah, different standard.
Yeah, CJ Stroud, Justin Fields. If those guys were leading this team, then my national championship pick would have been a little bit more confident.
Yeah,
is he like the next JT Barrett? Is he a different version of JT Barrett? That's what he reminds me of.
No, I mean, that's a great comp. I think he's a little faster than JT, but I think he throws it similarly. I think that's a great comparison for him, especially considering that he played for Ohio State. So it's really easy to see the two. But I think that's Will Howard. The beauty of this Ohio State team is this. One, JT Barrett would have won a national championship last year at Ohio State, right? As I think Will Howard would have. So he's not going to be CJ Stroud. He's not going to be Justin Fields. He's not going to be Dwayne Haskins. He's not going to be a first-round draft pick, I don't think. Hopefully he proves me wrong. But he doesn't have to be. He just has to be good enough to level Ohio State up a tick. I mean, they added Caleb Downs. They added these the transfer portal class, the development, the high school kids. Jeremiah Smith got named a starter, probably going to be one of the best freshman receivers we've ever seen. Like, they have so many pieces that he just don't screw it up. Don't do what Kyle McCord did and hang your offensive line out to dry on your drops and throw it in the ground to avoid a sack instead of scrambling to extend a play. Like, he is the perfect polar opposite, the yin to yang to Kyle McCord, where he's going to scramble around. He's going to extend the place. He's a good athlete. Like, he's a tough kid. My favorite thing about him is he is a competitive, tough kid. You saw that on film. People in Manhattan, Kansas talked about him that way. And I think he is the perfect quarterback for Ohio State, but I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback in college football.
So you brought up Kyle McCord. So my initial thought in comparing these two, was not necessarily looking at the film like you do, because I
Yeah,
can look at film all day and I watch a lot of football, but I can't dissect it anywhere close to what you can do. So there are football guys and then there are football guys. There are guys like me that played in high school and then just
yeah,
watched a ton of football, but I'm not a real football guy. I
right.
would never claim to be. But the first two things that came to mind were, well, he should be better than Kyle McCord because number one, he's got 2.5 years of experience in the Big
Yeah,
12, and Kyle McCord had one start against Akron coming in.
right,
And
right.
number two, he can when it's 3rd and 5 and he sees a lane open up in the offensive line, he can
Oh, yeah,
where Kyle McCord's got to think, oh, I got to fit it in somewhere because I'm
yeah,
not going to run for it.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that was under talked about, because a lot of people have been critical on the offensive line from Ohio State last year, and don't get me wrong, they should have been better and need to be better. But the number of times he hung them out to dry with one, I mean, the first two drives I watched of Will Howard, there was obviously Kansas State doesn't have the most robust offensive line in the country. There were several times a guy whiffed the block. And it's like, dude, it happens at every level. Georgia does it. Everyone does it. But you got to be at least a little bit athletic and have a little bit of gamesmanship to you to avoid a sack, extend the play, at the very least, throw it away. That never happened. It was an intentional grounding, took a sack. It was always just a horrible negative outcome, and it just accentuated any offensive line issue. And I think you've eliminated that with Will Howard. Like if he senses that, he is up out of there and he can run. And I think it's going to be nice to have that back at Ohio State, because even C.J. Stroud, great athlete, up until the Georgia game, would never do it. He would avoid a sack, but he would never take off and scramble ever. And now he did it against Georgia. Now he's doing it all the time in the NFL. It's a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, and I'm sure you came across this game with Will Howard. I believe it was Oklahoma State last year.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it just wasn't real pretty. Through three
No.
picks, he was around 40 some percent. And those are just stats, but it looked awful at
Oh yeah.
times. And
Oh yeah.
again, like you mentioned off the top, trying to convert Will Howard from the Big 12 to the Big 10 with much better weapons when his best guy was like a H-back last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely living in the lap of luxury right now. I mean, the skill position he has, the run game he's going to have. I mean, he's in. You can't get in a better situation to succeed than he has, and he certainly wasn't in that situation at Kansas State. And I think he really, I was worried about it, honestly, when he first came in. Obviously, I talked to several people around there, and it didn't go well at first. I mean, in early in spring ball, even it's just they felt like, oh boy, we didn't get like a savior quarterback. And when spring ball ended, everyone told me Devin Brown was the better quarterback through spring. And I was hesitant to even say that publicly because the year before I said he was going to be the starter and he wasn't. But that's what coaches told me. And this kid transformed everything about his life, like not drinking beer with the fellas, like training hard. And you saw him the first press conference in training camp. You're like, whoa, what happened to this kid? From literally like mid-April until August 1st, like 3.5 months, his body's different. The way he talks is different. Like you can tell he realized the opportunity he had in front of him and he just buckled down and was grinding, and it paid off. Starting quarterback, and they're saying he's doing a really, really good job.
Jack Sawyer, I believe it was at Big Ten Media Days, when he was asked about Jeremiah Smith, said something like, "Man, I hope this dude doesn't put too much pressure on himself. We want him just to kind of ease into things, understand, hey, some freshmen, it takes time and you got to ease into it." Da, da, da. Then uh, he saw him on the field for one practice, and he's like, "Holy shit, this guy can do it right now.
Right,
Like we don't
right.
need to wait around." And our guy Daniel is pretty much asking the same thing here. So he says, Zach, what would you consider to be a great season for starting freshman receiver Jeremiah Smith?
I mean, listen, I think that the lure around Jeremiah Smith right now, the monster that is the media beast has created is going to make almost anything a failure for him this year. But I think if this kid goes out and gets 700-800 yards and 8 touchdowns as a true freshman, it's it would be incredible. I mean, keep in mind, we talked about it on the show literally today. Ohio State hasn't had a true freshman receiver like be a key piece in over a decade. I mean, I never did, and I got there in 2012. So we're talking at least 12 years ago, from Garrett Wilson, who played quite a bit as a freshman, especially late in the season, but wasn't a starter game one. Chris Olave, fantastic. I mean, massive game against Michigan, game 12, but wasn't a starter, didn't play a lot early. Like, we've never seen a freshman have this kind of role in Columbus in the last over a decade. So I think the kid came in, and I recruited South Florida forever. His mentality, maturity is incredible, especially coming from South Florida, where usually they think they're going to start, they think they're the best thing ever, and throw me the ball 80 times. He came in with and had no expectation. He said, "What do you mean? Marvin Harrison Jr. was just a top 5 pick and didn't play as a freshman. I'm not coming in here demanding to play as a freshman. If Marv didn't, I don't have to." And just things like that he says show you his maturity and also his work ethic. I mean, kind of following the blueprint that Marv left, that multiple receivers before him left, of just the grind and the catching jugs and the putting in the extra work. Like, this kid, he's going to be successful and have a great year as a true freshman, not only because he's talented, but he came in with the mindset and maturity where he's not really a normal freshman that's trying to figure out where class is, showing up late to workouts. This kid's there early, staying late. Like, he's manifested this for himself.
As soon as you mentioned 2012, of course, we're talking week 1 and we're diving into 2024, but sometime in the off season, I got to hear about those Florida teams. I got to hear about all those Ohio State teams from you, but we'll do that sometime in the off season.